Hey, everybody out there with us once again. It's Mark Collinsworth, the CIO, the Chief Investment Officer of Vere Global Financial Wealth Management, to talk about what many experts or so-called experts are now saying is a widening and serious banking crisis. Mark, just how widening is it? How serious is it?
Well, right now it's in the category that it could be fixed, but it doesn't look like the Federal Reserve is actually trying to fix the problem. Problem keeps on getting bigger and bigger. A few weeks ago it was one bank, and then a few weeks later another bank. Now it's one bank. Next week it's two banks. So it's starting to pick up a little more steam and everything.
Well, among the predictors of gloom is a Stanford University professor, Amit Suri, who says that thousands of banks are underwater, saying, let's not pretend that this is just about the Silicon Valley Bank and the First Republic Bank. A lot of the U.S. banking system is potentially insolvent. Alarmist or realistic?
Being pretty realistic. There's a lot of banks right now that are underwater, and the reason why is because these banks, the smaller banks, which don't have a lot of diversified operations, bought treasury bonds. And of course, when the Fed raises interest rates, those treasury bonds go down, get hit. And of course, there's not a problem until those banks have to sell those bonds. You don't want to sell stuff at a loss, right? The problem where that's coming in at is depositors are getting 1% on their money in these checking accounts at the banks. Well, why do you want to get 1% at a bank that might possibly go out of business when you can put it in a U.S. Treasury bill and get 5.25%? So people are pulling money out of the banks, putting it in Treasury bills, and that's forcing these banks to realize these losses, which are putting them in dire straits.
All right, so far we've had Silicon Valley go under, First Republic bought by JP Morgan, and now, according to the rumors on Wall Street, Western Alliance, another regional bank, may be up for sale, and also Pac West Bancorp may be up for sale. Now, I understand they're denying that, aren't they?
Well, Pacific actually said it was actually looking for a buyer but had not found one, and then Western said that they are not looking for one. But both their stocks are down around 60% just this week alone.
So, Mark, I mean, this is going to spread then among the smaller regional banks, but not
Mhm.
the big boys.
The big boys right now are actually making money from it because so people are pulling money out of these small regional banks and they're putting it in the big banks because those banks are just naturally safer. They have more diversified operations. Like something like JP Morgan, only about 60% of their business is actually focused on doing what you would consider banking. Whereas one of these small regional banks, 100% of their business is based on doing, car loans, mortgages, stuff like that. So JP Morgan is much more diversified to be able to fight off these problems.
How afraid should depositors be?
Well, if the Fed keeps raising interest rates, they should be extremely scared.
Well, in fact, just this week on Wednesday, the Fed raised it again a quarter of a percentage point,
Mhm.
25 basis points. Again, that's meant to compress the economy, cause inflation to come down at the expense of jobs and businesses, correct?
That's correct. The Fed has actually said they'd like to see the unemployment rate go up about 1%. 1% translates into about 2.5 million people. So that's what they want. They want to basically have 2.5 million people lose their jobs.
All right, so the Fed raising interest rates once again, more regional banks in crisis. So does the increase in the Fed interest rate just this Wednesday was another quarter point increase? Does that intensify the banking crisis?
It does because right now, Fed raising interest rates has just caused the value of those bonds to go down and has caused depositors to start pulling money out to put them in T bills. The next shoe to drop on this is they raise interest rates to the point to where people start losing their job, and now those people that lose their jobs cannot afford to make the interest payments on their car loans and their mortgages,
All right,
and
now
that's when the really bad problem starts.
for depositors who have what is it up to $250,000, you're covered by FDIC, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so people with that don't have more than $250,000 in a bank don't have to worry, even if the bank goes under.
Theoretically, that is correct, but the problem you have to start asking yourself If enough banks go under, at what point does FDIC break and they can't even cover the FDIC insurance?
Do you consider that a real possibility?
That is a very real possibility. You can all FDIC only has so much money. And that's one thing they actually discussed this day. Next week, FDIC is actually going to take a vote to actually any bank that I believe that has over $200 billion in assets, they're actually going to make those banks pay an additional FDIC insurance to basically bail these smaller banks out. And these big banks are going to be very irritated with that because why should they pay for a problem that somebody else caused? And in the end, the banks really aren't paying it. It'll be the depositors. If you're earning 1% on your money in a checking account at JP Morgan, you might only start earning like, 0.1% on it to pay for that extra FDIC insurance.
Now, all the financial government gurus have been saying we may enter a mild recession. Do you still think it's going to be a mild recession?
I think we'll still be at mild, but the clock is ticking down on it to be mild. If we're going to have mild, the Fed needs to start doing something with stop raising interest rates or cutting interest rates. If they keep on going at the rate they're going, it's eventually going to go from mild to bad.
Well, this Wednesday, when they announced the 0.25% interest rate hike, that's what the 10th one in the past how many months?
Roughly 14 months, 15
Yeah.
months.
So, but they kind of hinted that this may be the final rate hike, correct?
Well, it was kind of a hint of a hint. So they basically said that they would be reviewing data to see if a pause was necessary. So that didn't say that they were going to, it just says they're going to start looking for a pause. Theoretically, they could hike rates two more times before they actually find a reason for a pause.
So Mark, putting this all together now, are we in deep doo-doo, or is it still, to be determined?
Well, actually, Larry, I'm not that concerned right now really about the banking industry. I'm really concerned about the debt ceiling crisis that's coming up if the government runs out of money and cannot make its interest payments on its bonds here in another month. If they were to default on their bond interest, think we just discussed the reason why these banks are in trouble is because they own so many treasury bonds. What happens if those treasury bonds they own at these small banks stop paying interest and they can't even get the interest payments on these bonds that have already lost money?
Well, President Biden is still saying he's not going to negotiate any cuts after the interest rate has been passed by the House. I mean, the debt ceiling has been passed. So is this just more of the typical brinkmanship, or could it really result in a default this time?
It really could. Another interesting thing, people will say, well, the United States has never defaulted, but they actually have. In 1979, there was another debt ceiling crisis, and the U.S. government could not make its interest payments and principal payments for about a 10-day window in there. And you saw yields on bonds shoot through the roof. Now, they fixed the problem, but in that 10 days, it was a rough 10 days, especially a rough 10 days for banks. And you're going to take a situation now where banks are already having a problem, and you're going to make what? If you go into a technical default, you're going to make another 5 to 10 days a living nightmare for them.
Okay, turning now to a more interesting, colorful, and maybe amusing topic. You're saying that there's a certain mechanism astrologically that may portend something that's coming up of a serious nature with the stock market and the economy, right?
Correct. Okay, so on to the astrology. There's what's called the Putz crash window, right?
How do you,
So
how do you spell that?
Puetz, I believe.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it doesn't work all the time. I mean, we've had, you like November, we had a crash window open, but nothing happened. But what's very odd about it is when the window opens, every major stock market decline in history has occurred shortly after the window opens. And what the window is a solar eclipse that's then followed by a full moon and a lunar eclipse occurring at the same time. Well, we just had a solar eclipse about 10 days ago, and starting tomorrow night, we will actually have a full moon coinciding with the lunar eclipse at the same time, which technically will open up the putts window. And for those people that think I'm just absolutely crazy here, if you had actually followed it and I try to avoid investing stocks, not because it hasn't worked 100% of the time, but when it does work, give you some examples. The put sell window opened 5 days before the 1987 stock market crash. If everyone remembers the big COVID sell off, The puts window opened just a few weeks before, went to a sell signal just a few weeks before the market tanked in 2020 during COVID-19.
So therefore, there is a history of it actually indicating bad things to come.
Correct. And I just find it interesting. We have this puts window opening right here at the same time, and all these banking problems are starting to develop.
So, Mark, what's the solution? Is there one?
Oh, well, they'll get through this problem just like they always have. But the problem is the solution to the problem is a problem to itself. You can't keep on taking on trillions of dollars of debt every year to fix a problem. Um, Eventually, you just run out. I mean, we've already accumulated 30 something trillion dollars in debt. And by 2030, by my estimates, we'll be pushing close to $50 trillion in debt. We'll have to borrow $1 trillion in debt just to pay the interest payments on that debt. And just to give you an idea of how big a trillion is, do you know what was happening 1 trillion seconds ago? 1 trillion seconds ago. 1 trillion seconds ago, cavemen were drawing on walls in caves.
We may soon be doing that again.
We may be.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people have no concept of those kind of numbers, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So, Mark, you're the financial expert. You invest people's money all the time, quite successfully. So, what's your advice now to people that have the jitters?
If you have the jitters, I really would be very leery of having your money in one of these smaller mom and pop regional banks. I would move up to at least a big regional bank where your money's safe for, or better yet, go to a mega bank like your JP Morgans, your Citigroups, Wells Fargo, those really big banks, or put your money in T-bills or something. But right now in a regional bank, you just don't know. It's the small mom and pop banks are just in a bad situation.
Wow. Okay, Mark, final word. I know how you usually sign off when things are bad. What's the rest of it?
Well, I'm actually going to add one to it. When it's always the darkest before things get really, really bad. And hell, it's not even dark yet.
Mark Collinsworth, the Chief Investment Officer of Vere Global Financial Wealth Management. Thanks once again for getting us very nervous.
You're welcome. Thank you.